It all started on an unusually calm Tuesday morning, the kind where the world feels like it's holding its breath. The birds were lazily chirping, the sun was warm against my skin as I sipped coffee on my back porch, enjoying the peaceful hum of the countryside. It was almost too still, like the calm before a storm. And then I saw them. Two men, dressed in police-style uniforms, stood at my gate. Bold white letters across their vests read HOA, and their badges gleamed in the morning light. My initial thought was that they were law enforcement, maybe sheriff's deputies, but something about them was off. They were too stiff, too rehearsed, like they were trying too hard to look official. The taller, bald man stepped forward first, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting the bright sun. He had that smug, authoritative air about him, the kind that made you feel like you were in trouble the second he looked at you. He slapped the flat of his hand against my gate, making the metal rattle. The other man, wiry and sharp-featured, hung back with a clipboard in hand. His eyes scanned the property, taking inventory like a seasoned inspector. I frowned, my gut twisting. I didn't live in an HOA. My property sat on 2 acres of private land that I'd fought tooth and nail to keep after my parents passed. No HOA had ever touched it. No one had the right to try. The bald man's voice cut through the air, cold and hard. This property is in violation of HOA standards. We're here to assess fines and begin the repossession process. My heart skipped a beat. I don't live in an HOA, I said flatly, but he only smiled, a thin, predatory grin. You do now, he replied. The wiry man stepped forward, holding his clipboard like it was some kind of weapon. As of last week, this neighborhood was incorporated into the Pine Ridge HOA. Failure to comply with regulations will result in legal action. This property is in violation. I felt a wave of cold dread wash over me, the kind you get when you realize you're standing on the edge of something you can't control. Pine Ridge HOA didn't exist. There was no record of any new HOA in this county. I would have heard about it if there had been. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a scam. I stepped toward the gate, my fists clenching. Get off my property, I growled. The bald man's smile widened, his head tilting as if he found this all amusing. We don't need your permission, he said casually, glancing at his clipboard. You have 24 hours to comply, he added, his voice lowering. Or we take the property. I took another step forward, fists clenched, my voice tight. Try it, I said through gritted teeth. The man didn't flinch. He stood there for a beat longer, his smile unwavering, and then he turned, walking away. The wiry man followed, clipboard tucked under his arm, and they both climbed into a black SUV parked at the end of my driveway, with no plates. The engine roared to life, and they drove off, leaving me standing there, my heart racing, blood boiling. This wasn't just a scam anymore. It was personal. I stalked back to the house, my mind already spinning with options. I had security cameras, I could review the footage, maybe catch the plate number off the SUV if there was one. But the fact that they had gotten this far, that they had paperwork, meant they'd done their homework. I pulled out my phone and called the county clerk's office. A woman answered after a few rings. Hi, this is Daniel Evans. I need to inquire about a recent HOA filing, Pine Ridge HOA. She paused. I'm sorry, Mr. Evans, but there's no record of an HOA filing under that name. My stomach dropped. Are you sure? Yes, sir. I hung up, pacing across the porch. The papers they'd shown me had looked legitimate, official stamps, legal jargon, the works. Someone had gone to a lot of effort to make it appear real. I checked my phone again. A text from an unknown number. See you tomorrow, Mr. Evans. My thumb hovered over the screen for a moment before I shoved the phone back into my pocket. I stood there, the breeze kicking up, rustling the trees at the edge of my property. I wasn't sure how they would come back, but I knew one thing for sure, I'd be ready for them. The night passed in a blur. I didn't sleep. Not even for a second. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their smug faces, the bald man's cold smile, the sharp-eyed clipboard guy, watching me like a predator. My jaw ached from grinding my teeth as I replayed the encounter in my mind over and over again, trying to figure out where these men had come from and how they had forged those documents. By the time morning came, I had gone through everything: county records, neighborhood contracts, property lines. I scoured every legal document I had access to, every database that might show any trace of Pine Ridge HOA. Nothing. No filings. No registration. No records. It was all a fabrication. This wasn't just a scam. They were too organized, too confident. They knew I would fight back, and they were prepared for it. This wasn't about a simple HOA violation, this was about control. It made everything feel personal. At 4 a.m., I was pacing my living room, fists clenched, mind racing. How far were they willing to go? I got my answer the next morning. The unmistakable sound of heavy machinery rumbled outside. The grinding screech of metal on concrete made my blood run cold. I bolted out of bed, throwing on jeans and boots, my heart racing. I rushed outside. There they were, back again. The two fake cops, accompanied by a crew of workers and a bulldozer. The machine's treads were already digging into the edge of my driveway, tearing through the asphalt like it was paper. Four workers, clad in high-visibility vests, looked casually at the scene, one of them already marking new cuts with a spray can. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, running toward them. Hayes, the bald man, stood to the side, hands on his hips, that same smug smile still on his face. The clipboard guy stood next to him, jotting notes like it was a routine inspection. Hayes turned toward me, unbothered. "You refuse to comply," he said in that same calm, matter-of-fact tone. "We're exercising our right to seize property under HOA bylaws." "I'm not in an HOA." I roared, my voice bouncing off the trees around us. The anger was bubbling over, and I could feel my hands shaking. Hayes just shrugged, pulling a folded document from his jacket. He held it out, almost like a trophy. "Not according to this." I snatched it out of his hand. The paper was thick, high-quality stock, covered in dense legalese, stamped with an official-looking seal. It was a perfect forgery, too perfect. I scanned the document, my heart hammering. HOA filing codes, jurisdictional claims, an official notice of violation, and a court stamp at the bottom, all of it was fake. I ripped it in half without thinking, the pieces fluttering to the ground. "That's a felony," Hayes said, his voice low and threatening. "We could take you in for that." My fists clenched so tight my knuckles cracked. "Get off my land," I hissed. Hayes leaned in slightly, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting my face back at me. "You don't get it," he said softly. "This isn't about the land. It's about control." The bulldozer roared to life behind him, spewing smoke into the air. One of the workers lazily swung a sledgehammer against the driveway, splintering the concrete. "By tomorrow, you won't have anything left," Hayes said, his smile widening as if he were savoring every moment. I could feel the rage boiling over, my pulse pounding in my ears. Every fiber of my being wanted to lash out, to grab that sledgehammer and smash it across his face. But I knew if I did, that was exactly what he wanted. He wanted me to snap, to give him an excuse to escalate. I forced myself to relax, to step back. "Hack it up," I said through gritted teeth. Hayes chuckled, that low, rumbling laugh that made my skin crawl. He didn't even glance at the workers, just stood there waiting. The clipboard guy spoke for the first time, flipping a page on his clipboard. "We've documented everything," he said, tapping his pen. "Your refusal to comply will be reflected in the final report." I turned to the workers. "You're working for him," I said. "If you keep working, you're trespassing." One of the workers hesitated, glancing at Hayes. "Don't listen to him," Hayes called. "He's not in charge here." The worker with the sledgehammer shifted uncomfortably. He was young, maybe in his 20s. His eyes darted between me and Hayes. "You keep working, and you're trespassing," I repeated. The worker hesitated again. Hayes's smile twitched. I took another step forward. "Get off my land." Hayes paused for a long second, then smirked. "We'll be back." He turned, and the clipboard guy followed. The workers hesitated for a few moments before following them to the black SUV. The engine rumbled to life, and they drove off. I stood there, heart pounding, hands shaking with rage. They'd just taken the first step in what would be a long fight, but I was ready for it. This was no longer about just property. This was about control. And I wasn't going to let them take it from me. The last thing I saw as they drove off was Hayes leaning out of the passenger window, that smug grin still plastered on his face. I stood there for a long time, hands trembling at my sides, blood pounding in my ears. My driveway was a wreck, chunks of concrete scattered across the gravel like they'd torn it apart on purpose. They weren't bluffing, and they weren't just trying to intimidate me. This was a clear message. And if they thought I was going to roll over, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. That was it. They'd crossed the line. I wasn't about to let it slide. They thought they had the upper hand, that they could steamroll my rights and walk away with a victory. They had no idea who they were messing with. What they didn't know was that I had a plan. I had more than just cameras set up around the house, I had Jake. Jake was an ex-Marine sniper, discharged after an injury cut his career short. But the fight never left him. He was one of those guys who always needed a mission, always needed to feel useful. Over the years, I'd helped him out a few times, and he owed me, more importantly, he trusted me. That night, I called him up. "How's your aim these days?" I asked, keeping my voice low. A brief pause on the other end. "Better than ever." "Good," I replied. That was all that needed to be said. Jake knew me well enough to understand when things were about to escalate. If I was calling, something big was going down. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours getting ready, going over everything in my mind. I checked the security footage and made sure the cameras were aimed at the driveway and front gate. I ran through local laws, memorizing the specifics of trespassing and use of force statutes in case things went to court. I drank black coffee, keeping myself sharp and focused. By the time Hayes and his crew returned the next morning, Jake was already in position. The black SUV rolled up the driveway again, tires crunching over the torn gravel. This time, they came prepared with more muscle, for men in work boots and tactical vests, looking less like construction workers and more like hired thugs. Hayes climbed out first, that same smug expression on his face. The clipboard guy followed behind, pen tucked into his jacket. Hayes strutted toward my house like he owned it, like victory was already assured. He stopped at the bottom of my porch steps and adjusted his sunglasses, smiling. "You're making a mistake," I said from the doorway, arms crossed, my voice steady. His grin only widened. "Oh yeah? What are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away. I just smiled back and said, "Not me. Him." A single red dot appeared on Hayes's forehead. He froze, his smile faltering. His sunglasses reflected the red dot dancing on his skin. Slowly, his head tilted up, as though he could somehow see where the laser was coming from. He couldn't. Jake was too good for that. "You've got 30 seconds to get off my land," I said, my voice sharp, the kind that makes your hair stand on end. "Or Jake's going to find out how deep that helmet goes." Hayes's eyes widened. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The clipboard guy dropped the clipboard with a soft thud, raising his hands in surrender. The construction crew backed away slowly, exchanging nervous glances. One of them looked ready to bolt. 10 seconds, I said, my voice low and controlled. Hayes's mouth twisted into a snarl, and he forced out a brittle smile, but his eyes told a different story. You think you can scare me, he sneered. I don't need to scare you, I replied, gesturing toward the laser. Jake already did. A bead of sweat trickled down Hayes's temple. He took a step back. Then another. The clipboard guy followed, nervously glancing toward the tree line, where Jake was hidden. 5 seconds, I said, watching Hayes carefully. His jaw clenched, and his gaze flicked between me and the red dot on his forehead. Let's go, he snapped to the crew. They hesitated, but when Hayes barked at them, they dropped their tools. The worker holding the sledgehammer let it hit the ground with a heavy thud and jogged toward the SUV. The clipboard guy followed quickly behind. Hayes took one more step back, and his smile was gone now, replaced by something colder. They climbed into the SUV, and the engine roared to life, spitting gravel as they backed down the driveway. Jake kept the red dot trained on Hayes's head the entire time, even after the SUV disappeared down the road. I stood there, feeling the tension in the air. Slowly, the red dot disappeared from my sight. I exhaled, flexing my hands as the adrenaline started to fade, though my focus remained sharp. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Need me to keep watching? Jake's voice was casual, like he was asking about the weather. Not yet, I replied. I walked down the driveway, picked up the clipboard they had left behind. It was blank, just a prop, a show to make them look official. It had all been a bluff, a smoke and mirrors scam designed to intimidate me into submission. But now, they knew better. I walked back toward the house and stopped at the porch steps, looking out over the freshly torn-up driveway. It was quiet. Too quiet. I stood there for a long time, letting everything sink in. Jake had given me the edge this time, but I knew Hayes wasn't the type to back down easily. People like him don't just slink away after getting humiliated. He'd be back. And next time, it wouldn't just be a bluff. I wasn't going to let this slide. That afternoon, I called the sheriff's department. My hands were steady as I dialed, but beneath that calm, the anger from the past few days still simmered. I wasn't about to let them strong-arm me off my own land. The phone rang twice before Sheriff Duncan picked up. His voice was calm and measured, like someone who had heard it all before. Sheriff Duncan, he said. Sheriff, it's Daniel Evans, I replied. I need to report an incident of trespassing and impersonation. There was a pause. All right, Mr. Evans, why don't you tell me what happened? I gave him the short version, leaving out the details about Jake and the sniper dot, of course. But I made sure to cover the important parts, the fake uniforms, the forged paperwork, the threats, and the property damage. Sheriff Duncan didn't say much while I talked, but I could hear the tension building in his breathing. When I finished, there was another pause. Then his voice sharpened. Did you say Pine Ridge HOA? Yeah, I said, why? Hold on, I heard papers shuffling on the other end, followed by the muted clatter of a keyboard. A low grunt followed. Son of a... What's going on? I asked. Hayes, Duncan said. Bald guy, about 6 feet 0 inches, mirrored sunglasses. Yeah, I replied. Duncan let out a long sigh. You're not the first person to call about him. There have been complaints, unregistered HOA claims, false property seizures, strong-arm tactics. But until now, we couldn't get anything to stick. They never stayed in one place long enough. They? I asked. Yeah. Hayes and his partner, guy named Bishop. Sharp-looking guy, wiry. That's the one, I confirmed. Well, Duncan said, I think you'll be happy to know they both have outstanding warrants in 2 counties for impersonating law enforcement and extortion. Looks like they've been running this scam all over the state. My jaw tightened. So why the hell are they still walking around free? Jurisdiction, Duncan explained. They've been clever, never staying in one place long enough for the charges to stick. But if you've got evidence. I do, I said. Security footage, forged paperwork, and a half-dozen construction workers who'll probably flip once you apply pressure. Duncan chuckled. That'll do it. How fast can you move on this? I'll have a warrant by the end of the day, he said. Anything else I should know? I hesitated. Yeah. Hayes isn't going to back down easy. I figured, Duncan replied. We'll be ready. I hung up and stood there, breathing hard, feeling the weight of the past few hours starting to lift, but knowing it wasn't over yet. About 3 hours later, I heard tires crunching on gravel again. I stepped out onto the porch, watching as 2 black and white sheriff's cruisers pulled up my driveway. 4 deputies climbed out, hands resting casually on their holsters. Hayes's SUV was already parked at the edge of the road, and he was standing next to it, talking to Bishop. I watched as the deputies approached them. Hayes turned, that same smug smile still on his face, and said something to Bishop, who nodded and turned toward the deputies with his palms up, ready to explain what was surely going to be a simple misunderstanding. That smile didn't last long. I saw the moment Hayes realized what was happening, the second the deputy reached for the cuffs. His whole body tensed, and his mouth opened to protest, but the deputy was already on him, twisting him around and snapping the cuffs into place with practiced efficiency. What the hell is this? Hayes growled. You're under arrest, the deputy said calmly. Impersonating law enforcement, extortion, destruction of property. Bishop tried to back away, but the second deputy was on him in a flash, pulling his arms behind his back and snapping the cuffs into place. I walked down the driveway, hands in my pockets, watching as the deputies loaded them into the back of the cruisers. Hayes caught sight of me through the window. His face didn't show anger, at least not yet, he just looked surprised. You think this is over? Hayes said, his voice muffled through the glass. I smiled. Next time, try knocking. The cruisers pulled away, kicking up dust as they rolled down the driveway. I stood there, arms crossed, watching until the flashing lights disappeared around the bend. A slow sense of relief washed over me, but it wasn't complete. Hayes was like a cockroach, he'd been doing this for too long, and people like him don't go down easy. He might sit in a cell for a while, maybe even do some time, but I had a feeling this wouldn't be the last time I heard from him. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, seeing Jake's name on the screen. Need me to keep watching? Jake asked casually, like he was asking about the weather. Nah, I said, looking toward the horizon. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the trees. The air felt heavy, like the storm hadn't quite passed. Still might be a good idea to keep an eye on things, Jake replied. Yeah, I said, slipping my phone back into my pocket. He was right. Hayes might be out of play for now, but something told me this wasn't over. I turned toward the house, climbed the porch steps, and leaned against the railing. My newly repaired driveway stretched out in front of me, fresh asphalt, clean lines, as good as new. But I kept Jake on speed dial, just in case.